Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, we are going to be talking about what programming languages you should learn as a beginner. So a common question that comes up when people are starting to learn how to code is, of course, what programming language should I actually start with? And some of the common responses to that I've heard are like either it depends or kind of just learn whatever programming language you want. And the second one, like learn whatever programming language you want, I get where it's coming from, but I don't fully agree. And of course, it depends is more or less a cop out, or like you need more details basically. And I'm going to be going through those details in this video, like what situations would you want to learn certain programming languages for. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started with that. So of course, naturally, the first domain you might want to be getting into as a beginner programmer is the web domain. And what I mean by that is anyone who wants to make like websites or web servers, which are like basically the code that allows users to log into websites and allows users to interact with websites and stuff like that. Those are web servers. Anyone who wants to write websites, web servers, or if you want to do like anything related somewhat to the web, you would learn a web-based programming language like JavaScript or GoLang. Those are the main two, and of course like HTML and CSS if you want to get into front end, or even like even Python for Django and stuff like that for building backend servers. Of course there's many different options. Now my personal favorite for the web domain would be JavaScript. And honestly, JavaScript would be my personal favorite recommendation as a first programming language for any domain. Like if you don't know what you want to do right off the bat, I'm just going to say I recommend you learn JavaScript. And the reason for that is JavaScript itself is predominantly used in web. It is all over the place. Like it's the most popular web programming language. And in addition to that, I think JavaScript is a fairly easy language to learn in the sense that it's not strongly typed, and generally languages that are not strongly typed, which I'm not going to get into like the specifics of what that means, are generally a little bit easier and tend to be recommended for beginners more often. But on top of that, JavaScript isn't a beginner's programming language because it is if I'm not mistaken, it's either or it's in the top 1, 2, or 3 most popular programming languages at all. It's one of the most used programming languages. So it's definitely a very good choice to learn, both as a beginner and as a professional. And then, of course, coming in like close and more commonly, actually, I've heard recommended is Python. Now, the reason why I don't recommend Python personally is because from what I've seen, the syntax, aka the way you write Python code, doesn't transfer into other areas of programming that well. Just for the reason that the way you write Python is pretty unique somewhat to most other programming languages that are popular, at least nowadays. So yeah, like Python just looks different from other coding languages, or it looks more different than JavaScript. So that's why I'm not recommending it as my number one, but it is a good choice as well, nonetheless. Now, another programming language in the web domain is called GoLang. Now, GoLang is it's a little bit newer it's a little bit newer in its popularity compared to JavaScript and or Python. But GoLang is becoming very popular for writing backend web servers and stuff like that. Which again, like I said, the web servers are what handles users logging in and users interacting with a website and stuff like that. So GoLang is definitely picking up, and it is not a bad language to learn. In fact, I'm learning GoLang right now. And I found it's pretty cool. Like its syntax is somewhat of a middle road between Python and JavaScript. So it's an interesting language to learn, definitely. And of course, web isn't the only domain. There are other domains in programming. For example, you have mobile development. Now, this is actually kind of reinforcing my recommendation for JavaScript even more, because a very common thing that's used, at least by smaller companies definitely, and by bigger companies too, is you can have something or someone called a full stack developer who knows how to code both websites and web servers, and then they can code mobile apps, and they can code like all the stuff. And that's what I do at my job. And the way I do that is I use JavaScript to code websites, to code web servers, and to code mobile apps. Using React, for example, to code websites, I use Node.js to code web servers, and then I use React Native to code mobile apps. And basically, my knowledge of one programming language allows me to make so many different things. And a lot of people complain like it's not efficient, it's not this, it's not that, but really it's getting much better nowadays. And a lot of companies just can't afford to hire 3 people to do the job that one person could do if they have the right skill set or the right tool set. So that's why I highly recommend learning JavaScript, because there are plenty of jobs in React, in Angular, even for web development, in Node as backend developers. There are plenty of jobs in React Native, to be a mobile developer. Like, it's definitely a skill that you can transfer. And on top of that, JavaScript transfers to other programming languages much better than, say, Python, because when you learn how to write JavaScript, the way you write it looks a lot similar to other languages like C, to Java, even, like to GoLang maybe a little bit, although GoLang is like a mix between the two, like I said. But just in general, like PHP, other programming languages out there are more similar to JavaScript generally than Python. And that's just another note. So yeah, if you want to get into mobile development, you can of course learn JavaScript and React Native, but another option, of course, is you can learn Java and or Swift. And Java is used to program Android apps. And if I'm not mistaken, Google might be using Dart, I guess, also, because Dart and Flutter is another way to program. Is another way to program Android apps nowadays, and iOS apps as well. So Dart is another programming language that definitely could be pretty useful, and then Java as well. And if you want to code iOS apps, you're going to have to learn a programming language called Swift. And Swift is basically Apple. It's an Apple-developed programming language that is specifically meant for programming iOS. And really, that's why a lot of React Native developers using JavaScript are in demand, especially for, like I said, smaller companies, but for bigger companies too. Because oftentimes, like, companies don't want to have to pay for a Android app developer and an iOS app developer and a website developer, that's 3 people, and a web server developer. When if you have the right person, and if you have like a simple enough requirement, you can get a full stack developer to do all 4 of those. And to do all 4 of those, like, with not that much like more work necessarily for them, just because being a full stack developer makes it easier to write code that kind of just transfers between platforms. So yeah, another kind of domain is game programming. And if you want to learn game programming, I would highly recommend C# and or C++/C. C++ are both very similar programming languages, and some people even use them interchangeably. Generally, a C developer will know C++, and a C++ developer will at least know a bit of C. So, they're somewhat interchangeable. And, a lot of people don't recommend C and C++ as your first programming language, but as I've seen when looking around the web, like, learning C and C++ is a very, very well worth it thing, even as a first programming language. I personally learned C++ as my second programming language, and I learned C# first. C# is a language that's used in the Unity game engine to program games, most oftenly at least, and it's used for some other things, which I'm not going to get into because the game development is the most common use of C#. And then C and C++ is used for Unreal Engine, and pretty much almost every other kind of game development besides Unity uses C and C++, except Godot, but that's another outlier. So most programming for games happens in C and C++, and C and C++ are very fast, but very kind of difficult to write programming languages and difficult to learn. So that's why it's often not recommended, but I personally learned it as my second programming language, and I still use it a ton today. Although it's not in my, I wouldn't be using C++ in web development. It's not that common to use it, but it's definitely a great programming language to learn because it teaches you the fundamentals of programming, like algorithmic thinking. Just knowing C++ makes it so much easier to do so many other things. that I do even today, because when you learn C++, you have to learn how to think as like, a developer who's thinking to make things run fast always. Because, there's no other reason really why you would be using C and C++ except to make things that are very, very fast and very, very, performant for users, like games, like robots and stuff like that are all programmed in C and C++ generally. So yeah, that was pretty much my list of programming languages to learn. As somewhat of a recap, I would say my number one recommendation would be JavaScript, hands down, because it transfers into so many domains of programming overall that, really once you learn it, if you don't end up using JavaScript itself, you will end up using a programming language generally that looks similar to JavaScript. So it'll be easier to make the jump. Python is commonly recommended. It's not a horrible choice because you learn Python, you may be able to learn GoLang pretty, somewhat easily because GoLang has some of Python's syntax. So, overall, Python's an easy programming language to learn, and I've used it and I've programmed professionally in Python. But I wouldn't recommend it personally as a go-to beginner's language. And then, of course, depending on where else you want to go, if you want to go into game development, I say C#. And if you're willing to put in the time and effort, learn C or C++. They are definitely difficult, and it depends on what kind of person you are. You have to be a certain kind of person to be willing to struggle through that journey of learning C and C++. But believe me, the people who know it generally just, it teaches you how to think like, a better programmer. That's kind of like, I'm speaking like a little bit weirdly here, but yeah, it teaches you how to think in a certain way, like in a very good problem solving kind of manner. And I'm not saying that you can't do that with other programming languages, but I've just found that other programmers who do know C and C++ generally tend to come up with better solutions, because it's just like when you're learning those languages, you have to think in a certain way, and thinking in a way that's different from the average person can definitely lead to you coming up with better solutions for various problems. So yeah, if you want to see more videos like this, I'm actually releasing kind of tutorial videos every couple of days now on my channel, and you can go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications, because I post daily tutorials and non-tutorial tech general content kind of stuff. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.